which teams do you think have the largest likelihood of beating the model, and which teams have the largest likelihood of not living up to the model? The model, of course, is the Pate State model, which spits out the JP poll. That's our own personal internal top 25, produced by our own internal model. The model's been very good to us over the course of history. No, I'm not going to show you the stats right now because we don't have time. You're just going to have to take my word for it or call me a liar. I don't really care. But there are some teams I think that we are a little bit exposed on that could embarrass us this year. It's going to happen somewhere. No model is flawless, so we're going to get embarrassed somewhere. Michigan, we've got at number 4. The AP has them at number 8. So yeah, I took a lot of flack because I put Michigan in the playoff actually the other day. And I took a lot of flack because obviously people think if you have your coach try and go to the NFL and then come back and you lose both coordinators and you lose a top 5 NFL draft pick and a premier edge rusher, you're not going to be as good as you were last year. And I get the logic behind it. My counter has been, you're talking so much about what they lost, you haven't spoken a word to me about what they have and who they have. And who they have are really good players. Who they have in those coordinator spots are guys who were already in the building last year. They didn't feel the need to go out externally and do a national coaching search. Harbaugh didn't, at least, because he thought he had his guys already around. The offensive coordinators, for example, were already there. So anyway, that doesn't mean it's a foregone conclusion that Michigan's going to fulfill all my expectations. In fact, this segment is about what could happen. What could happen is they aren't able to bring the same fastball they did last year. And they do drop some close games. Or maybe they are not able to get off the field on third down as effectively as they were last year. And maybe the expectation for that offense to take the next step, production-wise, maybe it's just not there. All these things are possibilities. I'm banking on the fact that I'm right, but in the spirit of this segment, sure. Sure, and I'll tell you what else could happen as you look at their schedule. It's not the toughest schedule in the world. So some of these problems could be masked. One of our favorite metaphors on the show is the dam and the water pressure. And a dam's cracks are only visible if you apply enough pressure to it. Otherwise, especially if you stand a long way away from a cracked dam, you can't tell that thing's cracked. It looks really big. It looks really impressive. Well, when you go to Iowa, do they have enough offensive punch to expose your cracks? Does Penn State at home, are they going to possess enough firepower to expose your cracks? Michigan State, like you can go up and down the line. It's really not until you go to Ohio State at the end of the year, at least as you look at the schedule, where you're 100% sure, hey, if no one else takes care of it, that team will expose your cracks. I'm betting the cracks are small. Some of you think the cracks are bigger. Rest assured, either way, one of us will be proven right by the time they get to the end of the season. The next team on the list is Clemson. We've got them, JP poll rated number 5. The AP's got them higher, so I don't know why we got a lot of pushback on this, but we did. And this one's not hard to figure out. We could be wrong on Clemson because the same problems could persist this year as did last year, and that's just offensive ineptitude. And then we add in the fact that we lost Brent Venables as our defensive coordinator. We lost Tony Elliott. This is all Preview Magazine stuff. You already know all that. But we haven't played a season. You know, sometimes I've noticed, I've done this too. In June, especially if you're a year-round type college football fan, you start getting your thoughts ready for the season, right? And so in June, you tell yourself, if you believe it, ooh, Clemson's going to really miss Brent Venables. And then in July, you're telling yourself, ooh, Clemson's really going to miss Brent Venables. But then by the time August comes around, you don't want to sound like a casual and just repeat the same old stuff. You want to sound like you're a little bit smarter than everyone in the room. So you all of a sudden avoid talking about Brent Venables. But here's the thing. If it's going to be a problem, it's going to be a problem. It doesn't matter how often you say it. So I've gotten away from talking about the coordinators leaving because, well, number one, it would make me sound like a hypocrite because I just told you I don't think it's going to matter much with Michigan. I will say this is not an apples-to-apples scenario, Clemson, Michigan. But also, I've gotten away from talking about it because, well, I kind of am the person that I just referenced. I just think everyone knows it by now. But if it's going to be an impact, it's going to be an impact. And if we're wrong about Clemson, this is going to be why we're wrong. We've got them at number 5, and they just won't live up to it because they're still missing those pieces, because DJ isn't at quarterback what he was ever expected to be, and some of the problems last year are still problems this year. And maybe even if they put K. Klubnik in, which, by the way, sounds more and more by the day like a possibility up there. Maybe he has true freshman struggles. So, yes, the problems could still be there. You got to judge teams not in a vacuum, but you got to judge them against every other team. So this Clemson team, I wouldn't like their odds against 2018 Clemson. That's not who they're playing. They're playing Wake Forest of 2022. They're playing NC State. They're playing Boston College, Notre Dame. None of these teams, aside from Notre Dame and Miami, can even come close to comparing to the overall talent roster they've assembled. That's not the team that always wins, but man, you have to have it to win. It's one of the key ingredients. So I still believe in Dabo Swinney too. That's another little side note. I also need to talk about Penn State. Penn State was one of our biggest differentiation teams. We've got Penn State power rated number 10. AP poll doesn't even have them ranked, which is kind of laughable. Even if you don't think they belong in the top 10, I can understand that. This is one of the 25 best teams in the country. Now, if you don't believe it, you're obviously drawing on the last 2 years and the record and stuff. And I've explained windshield versus rearview mirror mentality. It hardly ever pays off to live in the rearview mirror when it comes to trying to make money betting off this sport or just trying to accurately predict the sport, having a really good pulse. It's not smart to blindly favor teams just because they return a bunch of starters, and it's not smart to blindly be against teams because they have a bunch of pieces back from a team that wasn't good. 1,000,001 factors go into the outcome of a season. So with Penn State at number 10, I'm a believer in them. But if we're wrong, we'll be wrong probably because of injury, because that's normally how it happens with us in Penn State. But the other reason would be maybe offensively they're just tapped out. Maybe even though they got Tinsley in there from Western Kentucky and they think they have a really solid 1-2 combo at receiver with he and Parker Washington, maybe it never clicks because maybe that offensive line isn't as promising as it has sounded like it is. And maybe, therefore, that running game never gets going. All this is complementary, of course. You need one to impact the other to impact the other. And if that's the case, then they could easily lose 2 of their first 3 games. They're vulnerable there. They could lose, obviously, at Michigan. They play Ohio State a couple weeks later. Minnesota between those two is no layup whatsoever. You lose to Illinois at home, nothing's a layup. I will never, ever forget that. I was in the Alabama press box, I think, watching that game in disbelief. I don't care who started at quarterback, was in disbelief. And also, they end the season against Michigan State. So, yeah, there are multiple losable games there. I believe we predicted them to go 9-3. That was our most likely, with I think 10-2 or 11-1 is the best case. I believe in Penn State this year. I think they'll be very good. But if we're wrong, that's why we'll be wrong. Now, the teams we're lower on than the national types are, and I feel like we're a little bit exposed here. Ole Miss, we are the model. It's the model. It's not me. I love Ole Miss. It's the model. For the record, any team that we have rated lower than the public does, it's the model. It's not me. So Ole Miss, we have power rated 21, but we project their record at 6-6, last in the SEC West. And here's the really bad part about it. This is where you really just start to ask yourself, or the model, how do you expect this to happen? Because model, have you looked at Ole Miss's schedule? Just talking to the model now. You're just eavesdropping. Ole Miss's schedule is as follows. Think about this start. Troy, Central Arkansas, Georgia Tech, Tulsa. Those are 4 wins. If they're not, they got much bigger issues than even I thought. They get Kentucky at home. Then they got Vanderbilt on the road. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games to start the year. They'll be favored in all of them. The only one who should be able to give you legitimate pushback is Kentucky at home. Now, it gets very difficult after that, but if you're thinking about our model, you just saw them play 6 games that they'll be ranked in. 5, you're very confident they'll win. Well, man, no matter how hard the rest of the way is, they only got to win 1 or 2 more to surpass your expectation, and that's accurate. I see that just like you guys do. And by the way, that gives you a lot of time to get all those loose pieces from the transfer portal into something that resembles just a cohesive unit, or as you might call it, a team. And if we're wrong about Ole Miss, that's why we'll be wrong. Because obviously by that time, whatever you have at quarterback, you will long since have figured out. Zach Evans will be rolling and hanging 130 yards per game on the ground. So yeah, they'll be very good this year. I'm not, it sounds very weird, I'm not down on them. I think they're a good team. If I were down on them, I wouldn't have them power rated in the top 25. They just play a lot of good teams. And there's, if you're simulating things, a bunch of scenarios where the transfer portal approach just doesn't work out like you hope it does. You've got to acknowledge that's a possibility if you want others to acknowledge it's a possibility that it all works out. So, not everyone can be Michigan State from last year. LSU is another team I need to talk about. So I was supposed to go on Jordy Collati's show this morning, or Collada. Not Collati, he's not Italian. And we had phone gremlins eat that interview up, so I couldn't do it this morning. And I was looking in his live chat. And some of Jordy's audience thought that I had bailed because I did not want to come on the show and defend my prediction of LSU going 7-5. I have no problem doing that. Like I told you guys, it's the model. It's not me. Blame the computer. Don't blame me. I mean, off the record, probably 11-1 or 12-0 for LSU. But the model says otherwise. I would just ask you this. Can you see right now? Do you see what this screen says? Vegas odds makers. The people who set numbers that were able to build that entire city have you at 7 wins as the over-under. So it's not the craziest concept in the world to envision this path where LSU is 7-5. It's not crazy. I know that the glasses are always half full down there, or more than half full, and that's what I love about you. I would love to be wrong. I would love for the model to be wrong. I have a soft spot in my heart for LSU. However, let's just entertain this, because that's what this segment's about. If we are wrong, how would it happen? Well, it would happen with a win in week 1, I believe. For the record, that's one of our best bets. We love LSU -3 in week 1. Here's where I'm worried. And this is something that does not jive with a lot of what you've heard from Brian Kelly lately, and it does not sync up with what you're reading from insiders and hearing from practice. I am still not sold on LSU's ability to play at a high enough level at corner. I'm just flat out telling you, I know what's being said. I get it, and I hope they're right. I also know that there have been many good things said about many good position groups in the past, and then all of a sudden the season starts, and by halftime of week 2 or week 3, you're on the message board saying, what happened to all the promise and confidence we had in this unit or that unit? Just telling you, it's not really until week 3 where you'll start to find it out. Because it's not until week 3 that you get the kind of passing attack against Mississippi State where they really leverage you, and not just your number 1 or 2 corner. You find out in that nickel and that dime package, which 4 or 5 other teams on your schedule are built to exploit if you have a weakness, you find out about your corner depth. It's not just 1 or 2 guys. You find out about that depth at that point. And if they are a little bit exposed there, then that's the way it could go sideways. So that's my take. That's why we have a healthy balance of promise, but also a little bit of skepticism. But if I'm wrong, then that's where I'll be wrong. Because if I'm wrong, if we're wrong, if the model's off, it's because I will have whiffed on my perception of them at corner. Now, if you're an LSU fan and you're listening to that and you're thinking, wait, the entire premise of us only winning 7 games is based on our secondary not being up to snuff? Well, you guys know what you're hearing from practice. You guys know what Brian Kelly said. So if they're right and I'm not right, I don't like to say wrong. If I'm not right, then yeah, they're going to win more than 7 games. That's all there is to it. And then obviously the quarterback battle is the entire backdrop. I don't really feel like we need to talk about that because everyone's talking about that. It also wouldn't hurt to have a competent run game this year, but they still have a lot of talent down there, and they still have a path to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They got their own path to 6-0. You know, they'll be favored in almost, if not every one of those games. They got a game at Auburn, October 1st. The next week, Tennessee at home. The next week, on the road at Florida. The next week, Ole Miss at home. Take a break, then you get Bama at home. And then it's just at Arkansas and at Texas A&M last 2 weeks of the season, or 2 of the last 3 weeks of the season. It's going to get very, very difficult at the end of the year. It's kind of the same way with LSU it is with Auburn. Can you just rack up nothing but wins on the front end where if you grab 1 or 2 of them on the back end, you call it a good year? Or do you drop a game earlier than you expect to? Because I think even LSU fans would agree with me, if you lose to FSU or if you lose to Mississippi State, that throws an entire wrench into everyone's plan. Because everyone's simulation of the LSU season in LSU country includes winning those games. You know that, and I know that. So if you lose one of those, it's going to be tight point spreads. If you lose one of those, then everything changes. But that's where I could be wrong with LSU. Where could I be wrong with Oregon? We don't have them power rated top 25. It's one of our other big discrepancy teams. Their over-under win total is 9. We've got them going 9-3. So you may ask yourself, how are they going to win 9 games, but you don't have them power rated top 25? Well, it's because of the relative strength of schedule to some of the other teams ahead of them. Number 2, there's not a big gap. The gap from I got something in my nose. The gap between 15 and 27 is 3 points. So there's not a big gap at all. So it's a lot worse than it actually is. But Oregon plays Georgia in week 1. They got Brigham Young in week 3. We've talked about that already. If I'm wrong, if Oregon is much better than we have them power rated and they're more in line with what the AP says, which is number 11, it'll be because defensively, a lot of those guys that Mario Cristobal and his staff recruited, they play up to the potential that you always thought they would. And also, you just flat out get more offensively than I expect them to get. Because I think they've got some promising but unproven pieces at receiver. I don't like that they lost Travis Dye to USC. I don't think anyone likes it, but I think it's going to have a pretty big impact on them. I don't know just blindly that I can trust their quarterback situation. I don't know that I can just fully endorse Bo Nix. You're talking to a guy who I covered him in high school. I've followed Bo Nix his entire career, and I've always said he's underrated. But man, he doesn't have 3 years invested in the system out there. He just got there. So because of those reasons, I just have a little skepticism. But if I'm wrong, it's going to be because Bo Nix knows Kenny Dillingham's system. So it's not anything new for him. And those receivers do shine even more with this coaching staff than they did with the last one. And defense just is what everyone thinks Oregon's defense can be. If that's the case, that's a double-digit win team. That's a Pac-12 championship caliber team. So if I'm wrong on them, that's how I would be wrong. So you see, friends, I understand. There is a path where the JP poll just goes up in smoke. Little puffs of smoke. The whole thing, never. We're too good for that. But there could be some teams out there that harpoon us. So if it's going to happen, that's where it's going to happen.